Yeah.
But audience, we can see that you for the Zoom meeting we can handle it, but for the audience, they can see your look.
Then I suggest we go
Because
back
it's
to
shared with a screen.
then I suggest we go back here and I manage without my mouse.
Yeah.
That's better.
Yeah, we can handle it for the Zoom meeting.
No,
but
but
for the audience,
it's for the audience. They wouldn't want to read that.
yeah, the audience can see because it's a share, completely share with the screen. Yeah.
Do I need to wear this?
Yeah.
Okay. What do you want to do?
No. Maybe it's just so we can see the communication.
Add architecture.
Program guide.
You're saying I would make it?
I saw it. I was like. And by starting that conversation. I didn't know that was a thing.
Well, it is comparatively common, at least in the Nordic countries, to have the architecture in technology.
Yeah, it always makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know why.
Yeah.
Don't get a feeling. So.
Futurist and
Do I need to bother about the red text? Please move this further away, blah, blah, blah. Oh, it's disappearing now.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, it's not, no, it's back. What's that? Yeah, that's good. What? It's no longer reacting to the remote.
You want to use the room?
That would have been nicer. So, all right, I have to be here. So, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're at 10:31 actually, so we should get started. I'm Magnus Gustafsson out of Chalmers University of Technology, Sweden. I've been asked to chair the session and also give the first talk, both of which are on supporting graduate writers. So I'm looking forward to see what the sort of potentials are of combining that discussion towards the last sort of 15, 20 minutes. And that's pretty much it in terms of logistics and opening, I think. So let me try to give you some information about a project that a colleague and I are looking into, trying to get some sort of grip of in Northern Europe, in Sweden and in Finland. Oh, that lovely sound. And a few sort of background or context comments. On the one hand, from a Swedish context, in order to get a permanent post, you're required to take the corresponding of 10 weeks of higher education pedagogy. Now you can do that, you can have that as you apply for a post, or most universities will give you 2 years to finish those 10 weeks. And most universities will offer a battery of courses, some of which are compulsory or required, and then there will be a sort of a set of elective courses to choose from. So it's that context in which the Chalmers examples come. Similar development is happening in Finland. So that's the Aalto example come out of a recently started corresponding course for supervisors. So our two contexts have varying degrees of history to them, as it were. But I'll try to offer some introductory examples of that. Have a little bit of a look at the frameworks that both of us refer to or offer as examples in the various courses for supervisors, and then see if any of that is of use to, or relevant, as it were, at all, to you from a sort of WAC point of view. All right, so the Chalmers view of things, or the offer, if you like, to supervisors is, well, not in this particular order. The supervision of writing processes, the writing to enhance learning courses are delivered by me. They are part of the sort of basic 10-week offer. The supervision of research course is one that is required for promotion if you're going for associate professor or above. And the division of language and communication also has the advantage, if you like, of being connected to all of the writing courses for PhD students. They're modularized cross-disciplinary writing courses, writing for publication. And Aalto just offered its, well, right now, running its second run of their corresponding supervision course, which has, as it were, a combination of well, at least the two, the supervision of research and supervision of writing processes, that sort of put that into one slightly longer course. So some of the data today come out of Aalto for their pilot run, and we haven't actually been able to collect from the second run yet. I think that's pretty much it. And now I just turned something off. The supervision for research processes, or research for PhD supervisors at Chalmers opens on a sort of survey of what are your skills like, what are your attitudes like. Again, a fair amount of data that we have collected, not yet analyzed. I just wanted to give you a glimpse of it to see at what might the sort of the tensions or challenges be. So fine, they're considering communication very, very important. They don't necessarily feel really sufficiently developed to address it. On the other hand, they are somewhat developed, as it were. A similar sort of set of questions relate to division of labor and division of responsibilities. So what's the sort of, we should do that as well. What's the sort of writing support and who's responsible for thesis standard? And here, majority of supervisors relate, or not delegate, but relate most of the responsibility of the writing work onto the student, which kind of makes sense. They also, on the other hand, take on most of the responsibility for the thesis quality. So here's the feedback job that is required. The question then is, can they do that? Do they have the tools for that? So what we would like to study more in the context of seeing are our courses going to be good enough, or are they good enough? And for our contexts today then, does it make any sense in this WAC context? We refer to, we use, we exemplify more or less semi-generic supervision models in our two courses, or in our joint courses. Is that going to be relevant? Does that translate into our contexts in STEAM, in English medium instruction, and in a very sort of international, intercultural context, for which they were never actually developed. They didn't grow out of those contexts with some sort of tweaks. And some of the data that might be useful for that. We're interested in their expectations. We're interested in the tension in the division of labor, etc. Today, however, I'm going to have to be able to focus on the first one, the frameworks, and then to see, does that in any way make sense or relate to your situation in terms of faculty training? So one of the models that we both use in our various courses is Gatfield's model. I don't know how familiar you are with it, but we're effectively considering what level of structure do you have in your supervision, and what level of support do you have in your supervision. And needless to say, it's likely that it will vary over time and phases of research work, etc. Gatfield points out from the data that he collected, for instance, that we see some of that movement between different phases. And for our concerns, perhaps the move from a fairly contractual, high support, high structure to slightly more directorial stage towards the end of a writing process, towards meeting a deadline or something like that, is not entirely surprising. So that is something that Gatfield has seen in his data. So this is used, this is exemplified, we discuss it, and we're interested in seeing how do they identify, if you like, as supervisors in their reflections or self-assessment reflections. Another one that seems or has seemed relevant to introduce, and that we now want to see how it is used, how it falls, what ground it falls into, is Lee's. Now, technically, it's the initial data for it is older than 2018. I chose to use this one anyway because basically there's more data in it. And again, what sort of focus would a supervisor have in interaction with students or PhD candidates? So It's typically contextual, it's typically situated and likely to change over time. That makes sense. Where if asked to rank, the data that Lee has suggests that the functional gets prioritized, which again might not be entirely surprising, but it happens then at the cost of something else, and typically enculturation. As far as I can tell from the 4 articles by Lee that I have come across or studied, there is no explicit focus on writing for publication in it. So it's a sort of general supervision situation that they look into. So what have we found with our supervisors? So what we have is we have 18 self-assessment plans from supervisors that they write up after they take the supervision course, writing supervision course. And we have 11 reflective essays from that very first run in Finland. Technically, our initial data collection focused on PhD student sort of supervisors. Today, I allowed, as it were, I kept 2 in here that whilst also working with PhDs, they focused their self-assessment plan on what they do with master level students. But I left the data in there because it seemed well. It basically didn't make any difference, if you like. It made the same types of comments. All right. I apologize for the color coding. I haven't quite figured out yet what would be an appropriate color coding for accessibility reasons, and I didn't update for today. But here are the 2 models, if you like. So how do the supervisors identify, if you like, as supervisors? And if we do the 18 Chalmers supervisors, they look like this. And I should shut up and let you look at it for 5 minutes, but I won't do that. So some of the things that we can see is, for instance, that we have these 6 technically, that visualize, if you like, that move, that the preference, if you like, between the pastoral and the contractual. We have 2 of them move more towards the directorial. And we have this P2 that offers one example of what Gatfield found about moving towards the directorial in this writing stages, or at least in one stage of the supervision. What we also possibly see is that the majority of the supervisors stay in the upper level or upper half of the support scale, and quite a number of them in the contractual component perhaps at a majority of the time, if you like. To the extent that there are problems, if there are problems, I'm not sure what we can actually say with these self-assessment statements, but it's a little bit odd to find a supervisor in the lower left-hand corner, the laissez-faire corner, focusing on critical thinking. But then again, we don't know what the candidate is like. Maybe it's a perfectly self-sufficient candidate. So again, it's difficult to say too much about that. There's a fair bit of yellow in the supervision sort of profiles. So a fair bit of focus on the enculturation of that PhD candidate into a discipline, or for that matter, into a career. Not an awful lot of red. So maybe there's an element of leaving that relational work out, or they simply haven't articulated it, noted it, if you like. If we were to add our colleagues from Finland, I'm not sure the picture is drastically different. I think proportionally speaking, there are slightly more supervisors in the lower half of the model. I think there is more purple in the Finland connection, so greater focus on independence, emancipation for the PhD student. That might be a disciplinary component. They are not only technology supervisors in the Finland context. The Chalmers context is almost exclusively the hard sciences in the courses. Even if technically the architects are in there, they don't tend to come to my course very often. So there might be a slight change in distribution between the two cohorts, but I believe that's a little bit early at this point to say. So and this is just all of them in one place, if you like. So what? Does this actually have any relevance whatsoever to you, and why am I addressing it? If I could just take another few minutes of your time to look at two examples out of the context or out of the sort of self-assessment plans to see some of the things that they address, because I'm kind of keen on what you make of this supervisor colleague who was quite articulate about articulating 3 different roles as a supervisor and different stages, and how tensions between these 3 roles played out or didn't play out, if you like. So the project manager role, defining a small enough problem, being able to actually deliver on it and complete it and taking whatever role would be required in order to do that if we go through the 3 stages. The scientist in her, and perhaps I should say that almost, well, in my experience, every single PhD thesis at Chalmers is a compiled thesis. So 4, maybe 5 articles and an introduction to them. And they are at least half of those articles would be co-authored with the supervisor or with the research team that they are part of. And there would be possibly one that is single authored. So the scientist in the supervisor is at stake, if you like, in those publications, and wants a big enough problem and wants to cover all the bases, if you like. And then, of course, there's the supervisor function in it, who cares for the learning and for the development of the student, and the coaching component of finishing the article. So here are 3 sort of tensions to explore, and can we help in that with our courses? So this sort of balancing act of which function do I take on at what point in the process or in the processes. One more example with like 3 minutes to go. Another supervisor who chose to, in the self-assessment plan, chose to offer basically a text history of her most recent publication process with her PhD student. Again, fairly predictable work. Let's have a hypothesis. Let's have an idea. Let's do some trial testing or pilot experimentation to see if this carries at all. And yes, there are interesting enough results, so let's go ahead. Starts with methods and introduction. The introduction will need to be rewritten, but at least there's a good starting point. So the process seems reasonable, or at least according to the supervisor. Decent quality in that first draft up until the point of discussion, which really didn't meet discussion sort of quality or characteristics, and sounded more perhaps like something else. So she spots this weakness as basically a genre weakness, I think, an expectation that wasn't known or understood by the student. The next stage of that would be, or turned out to be, slightly more problematic because here communication comes into the ball game as well. So she asks, do we have results? Do we have the results by now? Candidate says, yes, we do have the results. Turns out they didn't. They had the data, but it hadn't been analyzed yet, so they didn't have any results. Technically, the candidate had all the tools and the skill set to do the analysis, simply underestimated the complexity of it and the time it would take. So they ran into time constraints with it. And now, with time constraints added, the discussion also became additionally problematic, as it were. So not being able to be selective in the discussion became a massive problem. So she articulates stages and tensions and challenges in PhD writing that I believe we can relate to and recognize, but they don't necessarily have quick fixes. So again, is that something we can address in our various faculty training contexts? And that's pretty much it, really. I've left our sort of 2 follow-up questions out for today. We keep waiting a little bit to see what the Finland study looks like, and the Finland data looks like, before we try to formalize and tighten it so that we can perhaps get some money in order to do this. But for today, given perhaps something like 5 or so minutes, is this at all to your liking from a WAC perspective? Can information like this at all inform your faculty training? We might be simply stupid and we should drop it altogether. But what's worth keeping from a WAC perspective from your end? And on that note, I'll shut up, listen to your questions, comments, reactions, and we should go to the next presentation within 10 minutes. Thank you. Is there a comment?
Thanks, Magnus. Thank you for your presentation. As you know, talking with Susan at Ohio State, one of the things we're thinking at CSTW is sort of seeing the wider demand, for thinking about graduate writing, both supporting writers, but also supporting, graduate instructors and administrators. Your question there, one of the things that popped in mind, and stop me if you're already familiar with it. Are you familiar with decoding the disciplines? Yeah, I found that model from a WAC perspective, really helpful as a way of thinking about identifying student learning bottlenecks. And I'll also sort of say places where students are actually succeeding as well. So I kind of add on some things there as a way of sort of working with faculty to pull that kind of tacit expertise as a way of building in. And I also find, I kind of do a decoding light. I find Joe Middendorf's book really, really very, very helpful, but we rarely have time to sort of do that sort of deep interview process that I'd like to do. But I find the concept that faculty seem to really respond well to that and appreciate that sort of shifting from finding those bottlenecks and being able to work with us as WAC people, maybe looking at student writing and sort of working through and thinking about, okay, what's going on here? What is an opportunity for practice and feedback, often involving more informal writing to do that. And I'm wondering what that might look like at the graduate level.
I do use, okay,
not in the supervision course, they use it in the course redesign course, the finance management, where roughly what 50-ish% of the participants come there with their supervision. So there is some data we did have on that course as well. Simply haven't included it. Yeah. So I'm not quite sure what they are saying about that. It takes a while for them to get around to working their way through it. And I could absolutely be more deliberate in that particular workshop section of.
Thank you, Magnus. I appreciate your talk today. And excuse me if this isn't quite on track, so because I came in just a few minutes late, but you have these very interesting profiles of supervisors from 2 different locations. And you said a little bit on one slide about students' perspectives in return. So I wondered how much of so we have supervisors who are reflecting on their management and supervisory styles, and how much of that gets down to the student in terms, in other words, is it information that the supervisors are able to share with students? Does it become a conversation piece for an interchange between the supervisor and the student?
Again, stuff that we haven't been able to get to yet. The guidelines, the toolbox that is offered centrally to supervisors have that initial sort of meeting points where they actually share the one about whose responsibility, etc. That's a shared document that they discuss, but we haven't observed or recorded or anything like that, those meetings. So we don't actually know what happens in them. What we do know, what I have heard, is when I meet those supervisors in the course for promotion, they refer to that conversation about the responsibilities document in some detail. They share it and they recommend it to the colleagues who were not aware of it. Because resources for supervisors are very hidden on our pages, so it's difficult to find it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I just wanted to comment that my research is on the other side. So I looked at the students' perspective, the grad students, what they thought of their supervisors and the outcome. So it's really wonderful to look at this. There are some similarities, but some differences. But I would love to discuss with you something that we can do together, because I have one part and you have the other part. So, but yes, that's really wonderful. Thank you so much for this.
Coffee. I did make some coffee.
I don't know where you left it. Dang it.
Did I get everybody?
In one.
And then one more. Question.
Hi, everyone. You can, okay, I can hear myself, but you can hear me. My name is Hannah Locker and
I'm Alex Drozdoff.
we are grad students at the University of Nevada, Reno. So today, thank you all for coming. We are here to talk about our role as graduate student assistant directors of our writing and speaking in the disciplines program, but mostly how we've experienced our partnerships with faculty instructors who we work with in our writing fellows program. In addition, we have our QR code and a URL there if you want to pull it up electronically. So I'll give you a second to do that if you wish.
Seem to have remote.
Did I press the wrong button?
Thank you.
Oh, yep. So here's just a quick overview or roadmap to show you where we'll be going. Alex is going to sort of set the stage with a brief sort of lit review of the ideas that provide a foundation for our work. Then I'll tell you a bit more about our institution before we jump into the specifics. After that, Alex and I will tell you about our roles and our Writing Fellows program, and then we'll offer 2 case studies that illustrate our experiences collaborating with faculty before leaving you all with some conclusions and opportunities for future work.
Okay, so I will just briefly review some of the ideas that were guiding us as we were thinking about this work. So I think, in this field, we have certainly in the last few decades started to move beyond thinking of students as just, right, like the banking model type of view of just empty receptacles to be receiving and storing knowledge while instructors stand up at a lectern, right, imparting wisdom. There have been shifts in the field to include more voices and perspectives in different areas of academia, including curriculum. And one of these inclusions has been student voices. But we are still seeing gaps with that, right? So for example, students may struggle to participate in this work. They may struggle to express themselves in some of the discourse that's generally expected in these conversations. They may also, these issues may be exacerbated by the power dynamics that exist between students and faculty. There may not be structured methods or time for gaining student input in curriculum design, specifically more of these like real-time updates that impact students now. And there may be uncertainty from instructors, particularly in WAC WID fields where they might be teaching something that they're unfamiliar with teaching writing. They may not know how to consult students to get their voices and perspectives, or even that this work should be happening. So we see this as a significant space for grad students, specifically at UNR, this GSAD position, Graduate Student Assistant Directors, with UNR's Fellows Program, because of our unique positioning between students and instructors. We kind of have this opportunity to move between both and offer these opportunities for rapport and collaboration on multiple levels.
So just a little bit about UNR. It is an R1 designated institution. it is a new R1 institution since 2019. In addition, we have about 14,000 undergraduate students, roughly 1,600 grad students, and we are a rising HSI or Hispanic serving institution with about 22% of our undergraduate full-time population falling into the Hispanic Latino category. A little bit of information about our University Writing and Speaking Center, which is the long way of saying our writing center on campus. It's housed in our Student Achievement Center, which is separate from the English department. So it's not, we have a lot of close ties with the English department, but it's not housed within it. And then it also oversees our Writing Fellows program, some supports for our first year writing program, and then also general writing consulting. We mostly have undergraduate consultants, and one of the big values for our writing center is to provide multimodal composition support. So support for writing, but also for speaking and presenting and making those presentations. As GSADs at UNR, we work within a couple of domains under the umbrella of the Writing and Speaking Initiative. And so where we primarily function are within the WSID program, or Writing and Speaking in the Disciplines, which is our version of Writing in the Disciplines. And so for that, we've, over the past couple of years, we've done website design, of faculty, helping to facilitate faculty workshops on assignment design, created source book documents, and then Alex and I also presented for one of the giant STEM lectures to communicate to students how writing is going to fit into their STEM trajectories.
So the other central branches of the Writing and Speaking Initiative are the Writing and Speaking Initiative Fellows Program, which is mainly what we'll be talking about today, and the Writing and Speaking Center itself. So some of the work that we do within the center, we help to provide ongoing education for the consultants that staff the center. We also act as just like a point in their support network as they're working with students. So to explain a little bit more about our fellows program, so it's an embedded tutoring program. The way that our program works specifically is we partner with a small group of courses each semester, usually like 3 to 5, depending on size. And these courses are working on some sort of long-term writing assignment. So this is something usually with multiple drafts. It might be multiple modalities. And so we work with a group of fellows in the course and find, in collaboration with the instructor, points of the assignment where we think that the fellows might be able to help support students in doing this work. So again, we're under the Writing and Speaking Initiative, and we're actually housed within the Writing and Speaking Center. Our fellows are actually UWSC consultants who can apply to be fellows if they are selected by the director. We help to provide them more training to kind of get them into this fellows role as well. So it's a very new program. We've just completed our 2nd year, and as a result, we've been doing a lot of testing to see what sort of partnership might work best for our particular program. So we've worked with a variety of different courses, smaller courses from about 12 students to up to almost 80 students. We've worked with both online and in-person courses, again, multiple modalities of assignments, and undergraduate and graduate courses, because we're still trying to test out what sort of partnership we think this program might be. I also want to provide a little bit of context about our work as graduate student assistant directors with our partnered faculty through the Fellows Program, just to give you kind of a broad overview before Hannah takes us into our first case study. So we are really working with the faculty from beginning to end. So we help to design the application for them to submit to work with our program, and then help to evaluate those applications to determine what courses might be the best fit. Once we sort of have some partnerships in motion, we're able to work with the instructor on some different things, informing our partnership for the semester, including the assignment that they are wanting to do with their students, like this writing or speaking assignment, as well as their objectives for the partnership. So we're able to work with them to kind of make sure they are beneficial for the instructor and the students, but also in keeping with some of the ideals of our program. We use that information to provide training resources for the fellows, so we can offer specific insights about what the instructor is hoping to get out of the program, what students might need additional support with, as well as disciplinary information if it's in a subject that they are maybe unfamiliar with. We facilitate introductory and class meetings between a variety of stakeholders, including fellows, additional admin, the instructors, and ourselves, to better share information and communicate, help track appointments and schedules while this partnership is occurring, so we can keep instructors up to date on how their classes are partnering with our program. And we help to facilitate communication between fellows and instructors. So if there are questions, problems, concerns that arise like during our work, we are able to just kind of keep the conversation going in real time.
So for our first case study, when things go well. So last fall, we were working with a 200 level psychology course. It was meant for honors students, and it was a semester-long project where students were asked to employ a behavioral change method across the term. And then the final project was to translate their written project into a presentation for a layperson audience. And so this instructor had taken one of our WSID assignment development workshops, and this was the implementation of that assignment that they had put together during the workshop. Additionally, this instructor sought out further revision support for that assignment from us, which I'll be talking about on the next slide. One interesting interaction that we had was during one of our meetings. It was with the fellows and with us and the instructor. And at one point in the meeting, the instructor said, well, and here's this rubric that I would like your writing fellows to fill out for my students for them to get a grade for these meetings. And we were like, what? Oh no, this is not what we've been trained to do. And it goes against a lot of our writing center philosophies. So it ended up being a positive experience because we were able to negotiate this use of the rubric. And so rather than having our fellows assigning points to the students, which we don't think should really happen in the writing center ever, we asked the instructor if they would be willing to use the client report forms from WC Online to base their grading off of, rather than having the fellows assign a grade. Because we understand that having a grade for these meetings, it does, motivate students to attend, but our fellows are also not qualified to be providing grades and aren't experts in psychology. Additionally, this instructor was really great. There was consistent communication between us and between the students and the instructor. So there was, never any lapse in communication, which was, ideal for this type of work. And since working with this instructor, they have become a sort of faculty ambassador for our WSID program. During the most recent assignment development workshop, they came in and spoke to all of the new workshop participants to discuss what they had gotten out of the program and out of working with fellows. So here is our sort of case study example. If you want to pull it up, I have it as a PDF. You can use the QR code or the URL. And on this pair of documents, it's my comments to the instructor's draft, and then the final assignment sheet that was provided to the students after the revisions. And so on the right side where it's highlighted in yellow, those are the parts that were added. And then in that black column, you can see my comments that I provided for this instructor. You can see that I sort of have origins as a writing fellow, because in the way that I write my comments, it's very much so the non-directive. I'll ask a question to see if you want to make a change. On the next slide, this is a continuation of that same assignment sheet. On the left side of the page, highlighted in green, and those little sections of green are just like the start. I added all of that information to the original assignment sheet. Originally, it only had the 2 blue parts and the 1 sentence after. And so I added those and then also suggested, you can add bold but I'm not going to be super directive, but maybe you want to add these things. So then it was very gratifying when the assignment sheet is distributed to students and our changes were accepted by the instructor. And so this really displayed the ways in which the instructor is able to collaborate with us, and we recognize that they were an expert in their field of behavioral psychology, but they also recognized our place as experts in this sort of assignment design and writing.
So just as we have these great moments where things go well and the partnership is really fruitful, we also have moments where things did not go so well. So we wanted to talk about one of those as well. So in this case, in this past spring, we partnered with a 300 level honors course that was facilitated by an English instructor. Our partnership with this course actually came from a recommendation from one of the fellows who had taken the course as a student and was like, hey, I think this could really benefit from a fellows partnership. So we thought, great, let's work with them. That course specifically was asking students to create a grant proposal for a research award given by the university. So our fellows were working with them at a couple points along the way of writing this grant proposal, which was a new genre for a lot of them to be working on. So the first, and I would say main issue that we ran into pretty much right after we established our partnership was just a lack of clear and consistent communication. And it's one of those things that like we know and we recognize is so central, right? Is open communication and this ability to collaborate. But it is really thrown right into stark relief how important that is once you don't have it. So once we were kind of unable to be communicating with this instructor on a regular basis, and we were unable to really develop our partnership and collaboration in the same way as we had with other courses, such as the psychology course, it really did damage kind of some of the work we were able to do. It really limited our work and limited our partnership with this particular instructor. Because like Hannah went over, we were able to really work with the psychology instructor from start to finish with her assignment and with some changes that were made before students even saw the assignment design. With this particular partnership, we were very much kind of just on the outside and receiving information every once in a while.
And so as we moved throughout the semester, and there was really pretty big lapses in communication, like we didn't know when the time of the class was, we didn't know where it met and what was going on because it was shifting according to when the instructor wanted to meet with their students. So that made it a little bit complicated. And then we weren't able to sort of get going from the beginning of the semester the way we tried to because the semester moved so quickly. So by the sort of mid-semester, we realized that, okay, we need to sort of put aside our non-directive hats that we normally wear in the writing center and be a little bit more directive with this particular instructor in order to serve the students. Because it's not really about our partnership, like it's nice when it works out, but we were really concerned that we wouldn't be properly providing support for the students in this course. And so by taking up that directive approach, things did smooth out a little bit. We still didn't really have any communication with the instructor. We just started reaching out directly to the students. And one aspect that we've discussed that sort of influenced this presentation was a lot of it seemed to be based off of our graduate student positionality within the institution. So even though we are the only actual administrators for the Writing Fellows program, every time one of us would send an email out, we just wouldn't get a response. So we were like, oh no, I hope nothing bad happened. And our Writing Center director was like, okay, well, I'll send a follow-up. And immediately within a minute, we got a response. So it was very clear that part of why we weren't getting a response was because we weren't viewed as having authority to be in this position and to be collaborating with a professor. And while that was sort of negative, it did, teach us a lot about how we need to be a little bit more concrete with the things that we're moving towards when we create the partnership and to have more specific guidelines. And ultimately, it did have positive end results. 80% of the students who submitted grant proposals did receive the grants. So we were like, yay, that's really great. However, because we weren't ever able to follow up with the instructor, we don't know if this was just because the students did well in general, or if it was because they had received the extra support throughout the semester. And yeah, so we learned a lot from our not so successful semester with this instructor. So in conclusion, we found that our positioning as graduate student assistant directors affords us these learning moments that can provide us capital in these collaborative situations. For instance, it gives us opportunities for professionalization, as you see by us standing up here. It also supports and promotes the growth of WAC pedagogy, particularly within our institution, but then also beyond. Our interactions with these instructors also builds relationships with our WAC WID program. And we think of it as sort of like writing fellows for the faculty when they're like, oh, here's my assignment sheet. I'd like to collaborate on it. Are there any revisions you should make? Is anything unclear? And so we're like, yay, success.
Yeah, and we also want to emphasize the importance that these programs can have for students as well, both in the kind of more obvious, you're working with somebody else on your writing to receive this additional support. But the less obvious, like more behind the scenes communication that can happen between graduate students and instructors and fellows to kind of be having these conversations about these are issues that students are having. These are areas that might need a little bit more clarity. Here are things that maybe we could all be working on together. They kind of just help to connect all of these different conversations that often remain separate, unfortunately, in the institution. Again, we just really want to emphasize one of our main conclusions from this work, and that is that open, clear, and consistent communication is so integral to this work and to developing these great partnerships across the institution. Finally, we just wanted to end on this idea that we think the growth of this field and increased programs and WAC with related programs offer these opportunities for more in-depth work, examining the relationships between instructors and graduate students, especially graduate students in these administrative positions, who have this really unique positioning to kind of operate between the levels of the university. Thank you so much. We all sit up here. Okay, good. I won't throw it.
Who's keen?
Thanks, Hannah and Alex. That was really great. You know, as Hannah knows, we've got a writing fellows type program at Ohio State, and you've hit on a lot of things that we think about a lot of time, a lot. And one of the things that is very important to me, is thinking about training and support for graduate students and the undergraduate fellows themselves. So, and I think you hit on what I see as sort of the core issues. So the roles that writing fellows and sort of graduate, we call them assistant coordinators, play in these courses, which can vary very widely, as your case studies sort of show, and being able to address these issues in very, very different kinds of contexts. And it takes a lot of thinking and background to sort of think through how to manage that variability and the malleability and I guess the precariousness sometimes of your roles. So the question I have is, what kind of training and support do you get, for your positions? And I don't ask that as a critical question. I want to sort of make absolutely clear. And what kind of training do the writing fellows get to sort of think through that role? Are those roles, I should say.
Thanks for the question. So our training is very minimal because we're just pulled from the TA pool we start out teaching first year writing and then we can be selected to get these positions. And so because they select the positions, it seems, and this isn't against my institution at all, but it seems that they kind of assume that we already have a lot of the knowledge and training. Particularly, I know you had a lot of experience in writing centers before you came to UNR, and I had been an undergraduate writing fellow at UW-Madison. And so that really sort of influenced we already had a functioning knowledge base, which was really nice, but also it was difficult because then it was sort of assumed that we didn't need extra support. But then we're just sort of like, oh, we're the full admins for this program. I'll let you speak to fellow training.
Yeah, so in terms of fellow trainings, that's something that we've kind of been working on developing these last couple years. A lot of the training for fellows specifically comes from us. Again, our fellows are pulled from the existing writing center consultants. So they've already received training to be a consultant. Usually they've had to be a consultant for at least a semester before being considered for the fellows program. So they kind of know some of the ins and outs of working in a writing center, right? Like non-directive approaches, ways to facilitate a conversation, agenda setting, things like that. So they're able to draw on a lot of that. And then if they get selected to work with a fellows program, we then work with them. And I think one of the main things we focus on is explaining the differences between working as a fellow and working as a writing center consultant, because while there are a lot of things that overlap and while you can build on a lot of things as a consultant, it is different work, right? You have more assignment specific knowledge. You are working embedded in a course. So we really focus on that to explain the differences. We do kind of work like this, like offering case studies and asking, okay, how would you approach this situation? What would you do if this sort of thing happened with a student or with an instructor? We do some test like meetings with materials and say, I came to you with this question, which is something that we might have created from looking at the assignment. What would your response be? And that work kind of continues throughout the semester. So obviously we do some initial training before they start working with students. But as we continue with our partnership throughout the semester, we have sort of these regular check-ins of, well, what was working and what issues did other people come across that we think we all want to discuss as a group? And I think that winds up being really beneficial because it's hard, right? You don't know what you don't know until you start doing it. And then we were able to have these productive conversations. Thank you so much.
Did you participate in WAC Go? And if so, how did that influence your work?
Oh, sorry.
So we did not participate in WAC Go. Unfortunately, I'm not sure why. I think it just wasn't really on our radar for, our boss essentially had suggested that we come to IOAC, but then we had sort of been so focused on that, we didn't end up sort of conceiving of WAC Go.
And I think that's probably also part of the stages of being really early in this work is we're still trying to figure out like what external things do we need to be consulting and working towards. So being here and getting those suggestions has just been so fantastic.
In that case, I might have, I always have the stupid foreigner question. So my initial question was going to be, how are the good cases communicated to generate sort of impact? But then again, I realized the demand might already be huge. So what's the demand for the fellows?
So thank you for the question. I think demand is still growing, right? We're a very new program, so we are still working on marketing and like making sure people know that we exist and that this is a resource. I would say the part of the ways that we're using these good case studies as ways to inform our work going forward is it helps us to better market the program and provide the information that we have found is needed for a more fruitful partnership. For example, like really foregrounding the importance of communication and stressing if this is not something you think you are able to do or not something you're interested in, and working closely with the GSADs, and potentially this isn't the right fit for you, but there are these other resources that might be better. So really using those experiences to then guide going forward each semester. How can we maybe better market and better explain our program across the university so we're really getting this kind of buy-in that we think best fits the program.
Additionally, one of the big parts of being able to grow is having the staff to do so. And so what we're running into is because we're pulling from our writing consultant staff, then it takes some of them out of the center. So we're trying to figure out the best ways to balance that because it's really nice when they come in with some training in writing center work. But then, we don't want to deplete the writing center from all of their consultants during the height of the semester. So we're working through that. And then also we've been sort of advertising this program within and the successful aspects of it within the writing and speaking in the disciplines workshops where faculty are developing their writing assignments because then they can just sort of like funnel into it after already having worked with one of our sub programs. We haven't quite gotten there yet. I've only been on this for a year now, but I'm very invested in pulling people from different disciplines, not just our existing writing center consultants. However, that is outside of my authority.
I do think that's like the next stage that we're hoping to try to work towards, right? Like, we're hoping to get faculty buy-in, but we're also hoping to get student buy-in for working in these positions because they're such great professionalization opportunities. So that's a continuing work in progress, but we're really interested to see how we might be able to continue to grow the program over the next few years.
And being a writing fellow is how I ended up here right now. And so I was never a writing center consultant. So I'm like, let's get people who don't view themselves as being in the writing center doing this other type of writing work.
Well, then you have the challenge of addressing the two panels, the two questions. I think I saw another question. Did I hear that? I did not.
Well, I do.
All right.
Small question. I'm wondering, so I'm a writing center director. So I'm just curious if you could describe a little bit about your relationship administratively between the writing center director and what you do, like levels of autonomy, how involved that writing center director is. I see that they stepped in, used their standing to get shit done for you. Oh, that was recorded. But otherwise, like how involved is a writing center director in your work, or how should involved that writing center director be?
I'll get back to the real mic. So in terms of the sort of, I guess, levels of authority within our writing center, we work fairly closely with our writing center director, largely because we are pulling from her staff for our program. And she's the one who's in charge of selecting the fellows. And then she usually has a sort of insider perspective on which courses and instructors are going to be fruitful to work with. In terms of autonomy, we are very autonomous. We just sort of do our thing. And if there's a problem or like the case study that we talked about, then we will go to her and say, hey, we can't get a hold of this person, or hey, I'm worried about this particular fellow, because ultimately she's all of the consultants overseer boss, where we are sort of shared by two different administrators. The individual who is overseeing our writing, speaking, and the disciplines program is also sort of our boss. And so it ends up being really independent unless we need it. And, that can be good and bad.
I also think too, and our director is great. And so she wants to be involved in thinking about this program and building the program. So oftentimes, if she is available, in some of these meetings that we're having with instructors or with fellows, like she may attend and just sort of listen in on the conversations. So that way she has, a bit more of an idea about what sort of work the program is doing, but also maybe some of the different ways that writing is being talked about across the institution, just from the perspective of our program. So I would, just to add that little bit about her involvement, that I think is a really helpful aspect of the program, is being able to have this person that's not, breathing down your neck, what decision are you making here, but also always available as a resource if we need it.
And someone who has so much more insight about the way that writing centers function, in addition to how fellowing is different, so that we can draw that sort of division for the fellows in a meaningful way. Is this your pen?
That's pretty much it, right? We're sorted.